Flamboyant celebrity chefs are not a rare breed on cable television today, but 15 years ago, they were pretty staid in their presentation and style. Then along came Jamie Oliver. From humble beginnings, the so-called naked chef became a household name in kitchens around the globe. I talked to him recently about the chance discovery in 1997 that catapulted him into the spotlight.
In a BBC documentary, Christmas at the River Cafe, the shaggy-haired 22-year-old sous chef was spotted chopping and sautéing in the background at the Michelin-rated London landmark.
Bernie, can you do me a risotto, mate?
Oliver's charisma and culinary flair stood out.
As far as I'm concerned as a chef, you know, it's the best job because not only do we have new things to cook every day, but we actually have a hand in writing the menu as well.
The day after the documentary aired, the reviews were in.
One risotto.
A star was born. 5 production companies lined up to offer Oliver his own show. Within a year, his first, The Naked Chef, made its debut.
Your discovery, and that's what it was, is a pretty remarkable story. Did it, even at the time, did it feel kind of surreal that you didn't mean to get yourself onto the BBC, you didn't mean to get any kind of cooking show out of anything?
I was naturally sort of quite cynical about TV. I didn't particularly like anything on telly from a chef's point of view. It didn't feel very natural. So when I got seen in the background of a documentary, and then, you know, it sort of sounds shorter, but it was over about a year, over a course of a year, you know, I'd been sort of chatted up by several types of production company, and then I went with one and sort of developed an idea, and it really wasn't, I mean, I wrote a bit of paper and that just basically said, stripping down restaurant food to its bare essentials, the sort of food that I cook in my own house for my own friends, and from stripping and bare, in that sentence, they gave birth to The Naked Chef. But also it was kind of, for me, it was always about like taking barriers away from learning. So instead of like, because everything on telly at that time was in a studio, it was lit beautifully. It was like chefs in chef whites with their name embroidered on their jackets and hats. And it was about kind of respect and admiration, and there was something about it I didn't like. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love and respect chefs, but it was a bit like seeing a doctor or a judge or a police person or a fireman. I wanted to take that away and just be in my house cooking stuff, and I was quite young. And I was quite wise for a baby, and I think that was quite appealing to the public.
You were at the sort of the first step of a really big trend of cooking shows. I mean, now, of course, there's a million different types of cooking shows. Why did it work? What is it about that format that you helped revolutionize that works?
Well, I think I was very naive, and I was very accommodating, but I was also incredibly single-minded. So like, I'm not doing it in a studio, no, I'm not wearing that, I'm wearing my own clothes. No, if you're going to cut it to music, it's got to be music from my record collection. I'm sorry, you're not going to cut it to that terrible library music from the BBC. No way. No, I'm not cooking that. I don't cook that at home, I cook this at home. No, I don't plate up, I just put it in the middle of the, so there's all these things that I was very particular about. And I think if you add them all up, and even to the point where, because I genuinely was sort of nervous to look down the camera, like I could never look down the camera, so I looked off the camera. So my producer, Pat, it was a conversation. And certainly in Britain at the time, no one had ever made a cooking show like that. It was more observational documentary. And the camera was kind of trying to keep up with me, so it was quite free-flowing. So you add it all up, and that was The Naked Chef. And of course, now it's not, unconventional, but back then it was like super fresh.
So what you didn't know wound up being the best thing about you? Yeah,
I think sometimes TV rattles along and you feel you have to go with the flow. But I think if you're supposed to have an expertise or have a job, it's really important that there's a kind of a genuine collaboration between the medium of broadcast and the talent. Because if you just go with the flow, then you just look like everything else. And I think, luckily, by luck, somehow I managed to kind of charm them and be subservient enough, but also be like single-minded and annoying enough to get what I wanted.
My name's Jamie Oliver.
Oliver's casual look and no-fuss approach to preparing food appealed to a whole new generation of women looking for help in the kitchen. Gone was the stereotype that cooking was a woman's domain. Oliver had made cooking cool.
I'm not going to teach you how to do it, because Ben's going to teach you how to do it.
And after a slow start, men were getting the message.
But also in Britain at the time, possibly like Canada, it was the first kind of almost generation where, we'd gone from 12% women working to over 65%. And so culturally there was an incredible shift in women in the workplace. But even though a husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend would, live together and go out to work and do a square 12-hour day, 10-hour day, whatever, they'd get home and the boys around the country would go, "What's for dinner, love?" And so there was this frustration in the air with the women, and I could sense it. And because I was quite young, and because I loved to cook, when I started The Naked Chef, women, cooking was for girls. And when The Naked Chef started, it was like the kind of, I guess the resurrection of, if you cooked, cooking got you girls. And it was that twist. And it was really funny being in it and looking back now, because so women sort of immediately, I was on their side, because they're going, "Look, there's this little kid doing it, so why don't you do it once or twice a week?" And men hated me for 2-3 years. They absolutely hated it. I got chased, I got roughed up, and then after about 3 years, again, like typical boys, they kind of had got a few skills together and started, and then I had men going, "Actually, I'm better than you, so it got more competitive. So it's been interesting, 15 years ago when I started, if I did a demonstration in front of 2,000 people, it would be all women. Now it's probably slightly more men. So it's amazing how in 15 years things can change.
The precocious cook got an early start in the kitchen. His parents ran, and still do, a gastro pub, the Cricketers, in the Essex village of Clavering, where he was born. It was there he got his first taste of what the future might hold.
And there's a few defining moments for me. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. I grew up in a pub, so I kind of done all sorts of jobs. And it wasn't a defining moment, but the first thing I learned to cook was an omelette. Just a perfect omelette when I was about 7. And I liked that because it meant I could kind of cook myself a snack or a lunch should I want one, and I did. I loved it. And then by the time I was about 8, I'd cooked my first roast dinner start to finish, and it was kind of I loved it. And I grew up in a restaurant, so it was very much around me. And I remember when I first did it, and Dad just said, "Well done, that was amazing." And I remember the feeling was not only did we cook a dinner, I'm sure Mum watched me from afar or closely, but I felt like I'd done it all. And I was so proud, and that kind of sense of pride that you'd put something in and then you'd enjoyed something together. And I was so young, and to be frank, I was not very good at anything else.
What made you want to train, actually sort of develop expertise in it in a formal way?
I never felt that I trained really. I was so young. Because I grew up in a proper legit restaurant with sections, it was still set up in a French regimental kitchen way. We had the sauce, we had the veg, we had we used whole animals. This is going back 40 years, 30 years. I'm 40 next year, but I was born there. So in the summer holidays and the holidays and the weekends, I would rotate around all the sections. So by the time I was 15, I'd kind of done the rotation 6 or 7 times. So, like most cocky boys, I didn't think I needed training, but I did go into training, reluctantly. But I did enjoy it, and actually it was the first time where I got good grades, because I'd got terrible grades at school. So it was my little moment to sort of, get some decent results for Mum and Dad to look at.
I actually saw somewhere that you said it was the first time you realised you might not be stupid.
Yeah, it was, because I was getting distinctions and A's for the first time. Yeah. And it was challenging work, but because I could do all the cooking stuff, it meant I could extra focus on the theoretical. And I'm dyslexic, and I was never one for sort of old-fashioned study. I was more get your hands dirty and just work hard. So, the fact that I could already, I remember when, because what boys they like to show off, and first day at college when we do knife skills, I could do it all, your paysan, your julienne, your chopping. I was as fast at chopping at the age of 12 as I am today at 40. And I remember the lecturer, everyone was learning to chop, and in the room was you could hear chop, 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 and I'm going, and he just came over and went, "Mate, can you please slow down? Right, you can chop, okay? But everyone's trying to catch up with you," and I've got 2 kids I looked round and there was 2 kids with their arms in the air because they'd already cut themselves, so I was a bad example. But that's what boys do, they sort of tend to show off.
Jamie Oliver has achieved a level of success unseen by even the best-selling cooks of the past. He's elevated his culinary brand into a global multimedia brand. In the second part of our conversation, we talked about how he dealt with the fame that comes with his good fortune.
In the 15 years since the debut of The Naked Chef, Oliver built an empire that includes restaurants, retail outlets, publishing, a television production company, even a charitable foundation. He's fronted 20 TV series that have been shown in 120 countries. His books have been translated into more than 40 languages. An empire valued at $400 million.
I grew up in a sort of, essentially a blue-collar family that sort of graduated over 10, 15 years to middle class, or whatever you want to call it. You know, Dad came from a poor family, set up with very little, and I'd only ever earned a hard quid. You know, he never earned an easy quid. But then his son makes a book, and it was a lovely book. I mean, I love that. Today I still love that book, and it sounds and it has still same heart, but just like it's a little moment. And the public, not just in England, but also in Canada and America and Australia and New Zealand and South Africa, decided in about 3 months to buy it. So I went from being broke to having £1 million in the bank. You know, that's not normal. And I was a baby, so that it was quite hard to deal with, and like, you know, and Dad was like proud and pleased with me, but like I'm still a baby, and like, you know, kind of like he was quite wary of it, and actually we sort of didn't fall out, but you know, one of the kind of, you know, I didn't go off the rails or anything, but I liked having the money. But it was just very, very weird because I'd only ever, you know, for all the years I can remember, I'd have only 20 quid spare after I'd paid all my bills and done stuff. And then I'd still be scamping about trying to do a few extra jobs. But that's why I set up 15, you know, which for 3 weeks, kind of from the taxman's point of view, unofficially, I was bankrupt because it went over budget. But luckily, another book royalty check came through and saved me, but it was kind of that was kind of why I set up 15, which was kind of like an antidote to this really weird scenario.
To keep from being messed up by...
Yeah, I liked it, but I was really uncomfortable and I didn't know what to do with it. I was only 24, 23, you know, and it's just a very strange thing. But luckily, you know, I think family was there for me. Like my wife I've been with since I was 18. So there was I wasn't sort of a dude that was into drugs or anything. So like where some sort of maybe other celebrities or pop stars might have a similar scenario, you know, I kind of was humbled, and you know, mum and dad and friends still slapped me and kept me on the straight and narrow. So I got through it, and it sounds like a really weird problem to have, but it was weird.
No, it messes people up, as does celebrity. So on that front, you know, you must find that you're bombarded with people in all kinds of different ways that can mess your life up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, truly, like the first 2.5 years of The Naked Chef I can only compare it to One Direction now. I mean, really, I know I'm not nowhere near as exciting as a pop band, but it really was just like that.
Yeah.
You know, I'd go and do a book signing, and I'd go with 2 hours, and I'd be there for 4 hours, and there'd be 1,500 people there, 2,000 people there. You know, you'd have to call in extra police, and there'd be sirens going off, and there'd be like people fainting, and there'd be like dads who've queued for 2 hours with their 4-year-old handicapped kid that are getting irate and want to smash up someone because their kid's not going to get a signed book. And I'm sort of just sitting there going, okay, yeah, Naked Chef, carbonara. You know, it was all a bit weird, you know, and then what happens is, and also in my game, I say in my game, in the celebrity game, a lot of celebrities kind of get eaten up and spat out in about 3 to 4 years. And of course now I've been doing it for 15 years. So that makes me an old timer, but also that celebrity thing changes. Do you know what I mean? Like now it's what happens and how they do and people treat you, and it kind of goes from one gear to another really. So I kind of think I've got my head around it now.
One thing seems certain, that new gear isn't a slower one. With a new show in Canada and a new restaurant, Oliver's status as a household name seems secure.
You have enormous wealth. You have an enormous empire and reach. You keep expanding. You're opening restaurants in Canada, a new show that's airing here. What motivates you? When is enough enough?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's I'm not an accountant or sort of academically sort of all over that. I mean, if anything at the moment, I'm restructuring and shrinking a lot of what I'm doing and refocusing. And yes, we are opening a restaurant in Toronto, and we've got an amazing partner, and we feel we have an offer that is full of energy and great values and is an amazing sort of good value offer. So it's an honour to do that. But I mean, I think generally speaking across everything that I do, I mean, because I'm quite sort of entrepreneurial or don't mind having a go, you know, I'm quite experimental, and I'm not really wedded to cash. It's not a motivator for me, honestly. Absolutely factually, I have less money in my bank account today than I would have had 10 years ago. You know, I mean, everything that I've got is out in restaurants and people, and I generally, you know, come up with some good stuff. But we have stuff that doesn't work as well. I mean, if you're going to pioneer or test things, often you're kind of making all the mistakes for others.
Right.
So, you know, I think, often people tell me how massive my empire is, and I kind of think, well, if you look at my bank account, it ain't that flush. But, you know, I do like the world of food, I think, is really exciting, and I do like to have a go, and I do think that whatever I do, trying to raise the bar is absolutely my job. But you know, it still makes me get out of bed in the morning, and I'm excited. So while that sort of still happens, I mean, I'd like to think that I kind of narrow but widen what I do, if that makes any sense at all. I'm going to do less things, but I want to do them better and bigger and badder. You
pretty early used your power, your celebrity, for bigger picture things like, you know, quality of food, food in schools, how people eat, and bringing kind of highlighting issues that we need to talk about. Why did you go there? Why did you want to do any of that?
Well, I think partly for any of us, like, life is a journey. So, you know, in your sort of, you know, hopefully in all of us, the sort of spark that makes us do something at 40 and 50 is still the same as when you were 20 or 30, for sure. But also, like, as you build relationships and friendships and be faced with different challenges and opportunities, the story continues and evolves. And you kind of just got to let it wash through you and go with it, really. At the same time, I think I was very sober to the fact that I had an audience. You know, The Naked Chef quickly went to about 80 countries around the world. You know, we're currently in 120 now, you know, 200 broadcasters. So you're curious, of course, because no sane person would ever think that would be. So you start looking at feedback, and, you know, in those days it would be like I'd get like 7 sacks, giant sacks of mail from around the world, from, you know, the BBC Mail Centre in Ireland that would, you know, dump it off in my house, and, you know, like, the mail was bigger than my house. You know, now it's kind of social media. So I think, you know, I kind of, what do you do with that audience? And obviously foods, I thought it was just about cooking, but of course food's so central emotionally, and health-wise and fun-wise to a home, you know, that, you know, you start to realise that you've got quite an important, trusted part of people's lives. Do you know what I mean? Like, and also the relationship with a book is quite an interesting one, you know. Like, you can sell a few books on luck or timing, but to do it sort of at that stage, it was sort of 4 times. So I knew that it was I knew that my boss was the public. So I felt that when things happened in the public domain, I had to go out, find about it, and then tell them what was going on.
You've raised issues that people might not have thought of. You know, even things like how a free trade agreement between 2 countries can change your food safety, the supply of your...
And one between Canada and England as well soon.
Do you think people have a better understanding today? Is it an uphill battle to get people to think in this way?
Some are easy, some are complex. And obviously, I guess the interesting thing is, for someone like myself or yourself, if we're lucky, if we do our jobs right, we have the capacity to sort of have a fairly long-standing relationship with the public, and hopefully we do a good job. But for the politicians that live in our lives, they're quite transient. As my nan would say, they're like ships that pass in the night. And one of the beautiful things that democracy brings us is every 4 years we go through this whole thing. And you know, I've been through 9 education secretaries in 10 years. You know, so things like the trade agreement, it sounds really boring and dull, but for certainly America and England, it's very worrying with regards to sort of GMO crops that we don't have in Europe, with antibiotics in meat production, which not antibiotics, hormones, which we don't have in Europe, and 1,000 other things. So I think trying to get the public, and it's quite a boring subject, but it would affect every single British person and farmer in so many ways, from a health point of view, from a kind of economical point of view. So you do feel the pressure that you have to try and make something very boring that needs explaining and possibly graphics. I kind of, how can I explain it? I do feel that my job's to kind of almost creatively sort of stir the pot, and it seems to work. It does.
It does. We gotta leave it there. We appreciate your time.
Take care. Nice to see you.